Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, where real people share real life experiences and the tools they've developed to move forward and live their best life. I'm Michelle Scharf.
And I am Jennie Taylor. And you guys, I am so excited about our guest today because she's been one of my friends longer than most people I know have been friends. This is my sister-in-law, Brittany Taylor. We married brothers a decade and a half ago, I guess closer to 2 decades ago now. It's crazy to think of that. Brittany and I go back to 2003, which is, again, a long time ago. We married these brothers at about the same time. We started having kids at about the same time. She is an amazing person, an amazing mother, far more organized than I could ever dream of being. And I'm just really grateful that she would join us today. Brittany, thanks for coming on with us. I wish you could be here in person, but with COVID, we're doing things over Zoom. But we're just grateful you would take some time out of your work day to share with us.
I'm so excited about this.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jenny's told me a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to just be fun.
Well, and this is great because, like I said, Brittany and I met while we were dating these two brothers who at the time were students. Our husbands were both attending BYU down in Provo, Utah, and we were young and ambitious. Brittany's much younger than I am. I was far old and advanced when I met her. She was straight out of high school. But Brittany, can you introduce us a little bit to your story, your background, and then bring us into why it is we've got you here talking about resilience, because I think you are a wonderful example of resilience, living through hard things and still finding a way to get up and fight back every day and living what I feel like you've got a beautiful life. Maybe hasn't gone the way either of us thought it would. Yours and mine have not for sure. And yet I look at your beautiful kids. I look at what you do at work every day, the people you influence, and I'm just grateful that you have found it within yourself to exercise that resiliency, to pull it out of who knows where and keep going day after day. So welcome. And we're excited to get to know a little more about your story.
Thank you. Okay, so my story starts in 2003. You're right after high school. I was 18 years old, and I moved from California to Utah, which is where I met my ex-husband, Bryan, in the laundromat of our apartment complex. So,
which has got to be the best story ever. Like, let's just own that one.
We got married about 6 months after we met, and about a year later had our first child. Joined the military, moved around a lot, and we had from 2005 to 2011 we had our 5 children. We have 3 boys and 2 girls, and life was just kind of a whirlwind, but
So that's a lot of children. I mean, I have a lot of children, so I feel like I am in a position to say that. That's a lot of children very quickly. And you were very young. You had that first baby right after you got married, and then at the same time, your husband's joining the military. I remember going with you when Bryan graduated from boot camp. Do you want to tell them why I had to go with you when Bryan graduated boot camp?
Oh, I forgot about this. Yes. Yeah. So, Jenny, you came with me because I was not old enough to rent a car.
Isn't that hilarious?
I was 21 at the time.
You had at least one.
I had to
you were married with a baby.
Come with me. An adultier adult come with me.
And like I said, I am much Brittany's senior, so I was able to be the chaperoning driver of the rental car. But so you're right out of the chute, out of high school. You've moved out of state. You're married. You're moving several times. You've got all these babies. That is a whirlwind for that first, 8 or 9 years of your married life. It
was a whirlwind, but we were really happy, really in love, almost obnoxiously so to the people around us.
Is this where I comment? Okay, guys, listen. So this was the couple who, when we got together over Christmas vacations pre-COVID, and the sisters-in-law would be like, hey, let's go get our nails done. And the brothers would be like, hey, let's go do something manly. And Bryan and Brittany were like, no, we're going to stay together. Okay, cool. Like, that's fine. But you had such a sweet and tender relationship. You guys were always together. Such a great team relationship. I remember always noticing that if we ever visited you out of state, the way you worked together with the children, way to work together in the home. Definitely a very close relationship. From an outside perspective, I can attest to that.
Yeah. Well, when we first met, I wrote in my journal about like reflecting just a few, it's post-engagement, but pre-marriage, that I wrote in my journal about how when he and I met at that laundromat, it was like I had discovered my very best friend that I didn't know was missing from my life.
How sweet.
So beautiful.
So that's just kind of how both of us felt. We're both pretty socially awkward. And so the fact that things were so natural and easy between the two of us, always have been, even till this day, they're still natural and easy between the two of us. That was really big. We were truly, genuinely very best friends.
So you mentioned that taking up to 2011, you've got all of the kids. Maybe give us those middle years where you go from like this happy, great connection, best friend to, obviously, you mentioned he is your ex-husband. Something changed along the way. Walk us through that a little bit.
So in 2011, right after we had our fifth baby, we were in Georgia at the time for just a very brief amount of time. And Bryan had got accepted into law school. So we applied to a bunch of different law schools and we moved to Las Vegas. And at this time, all the kids were starting to get older and get into school. And he had a lot of pressure from the military at the time because the military was paying him to go to law school. So they were giving him salary and paying his tuition to go to law school. So it was a significant amount of pressure on him to perform well. He felt like he wasn't happy, but he felt kind of stuck because he had this great opportunity of the military paying for school and paying his salary at the same time, that he kind of just soldiered on with it. But internally, his mental state was going further and further downhill. And he, delved into a pretty deep depression and anxiety.
Now, is this something, and feel free to not share anything you're not comfortable sharing, but is this depression, anxiety something that he had dealt with before? Did it come as a surprise to you in your relationship after that first decade of marriage?
So he had dealt with it before when he was about in sixth grade is the first time he can pinpoint a depressive episode. He just told his mom, I have a headache. I just can't go to school. So she let him stay home from school for about a week. And then life just kind of resumed as normal, and nothing again until his later teenage years was his next depressive episode, which he again kind of came out of right before he and I met. He was 23 at the time that he and I met. And so, for that 10 years, I didn't know depressive episode Bryan. So it was a shock to me to be seeing it, although I knew it had issues in the past.
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo that as well. I remember when I met Brent. Again, I met Brent right around the same time you met Bryan. And Brent had this brother that was just younger than him, that he'd said he'd had some struggles, when he, like you said, the late teenage years, but at this time he was doing better. He was turning his life around. He was coming up to BYU, very intelligent. Bryan's one of the smartest men I know. Like you said, he ends up in law school. And so I also never knew the anxiety and the depression that Bryan had faced. I'd heard maybe he'd struggled as a teenager, but a lot of people struggle as teenagers. People rebel or kind of trying to find their way. I just remember you and Bryan, and at that same stage when Brent and I were new in our marriage, again, hard worker, great soldier, great husband, great father, great student, and that's kind of what we all saw, not knowing, that those darker feelings that, like you said, we're kind of under it all, and it started to come out with those different pressures.
Yeah, I guess just the pressures of school and kids and trying to be a husband and a father, trying to basically keep up the facade just grew to be too much because we, as best friends, we communicated, but we didn't really communicate about hard things, which if I had like a little time traveling machine, I would go back and ask those harder questions. Like I just assumed because I was busy and I was okay that he was okay too. And he would bring it up. And in hindsight, I wish I could go back and ask some of the harder questions of, well, how are you really feeling about this? And is this making you happy? I just assumed it was because it's what we were doing, but I wish I would have asked.
Yeah. Some of those questions that are either too hard to ask, or like you said, you're just busy and life is moving so quickly that maybe you didn't think it was necessary to ask.
Well, and youth and immaturity, right? I mean, you just don't know until something happens and you discover, oh, wait a minute. Now I can see this and maybe I should have, it's easier to look back than it is to when you're in the middle of it. You're caught in the middle of life, Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it gets...
So what happened? Tell us.
So after, let's see. So he, for his law school, part of the program was that every summer he needed to go do like an internship at a different base somewhere in the U.S. So his first year, he went to Fort Irwin, California, and that all went great. He had a good time there. He learned a lot. He would come home on the weekends. It was close enough to Vegas that he could travel back and forth. His second year is when things really started getting tough. He went to Washington State, Fort Lewis, and that's when I don't know exactly what happened in his brain. I can only tell it from my perspective, but that's when something happened within him, and that was his first of 6 suicide attempts.
Oh, wow.
He went and found, or he got a hotel room up in Seattle, and he was going to jump off of one of the higher floors. And it was I felt a little bit like Nancy Drew FBI at that time, because it was all I was checking bank accounts. I was on the phone with Seattle police trying to find him, and I was tracking his credit card to say, okay, well, he's here now. And I called this hotel. And so they literally knocked on the door as he was about to step out onto that balcony.
Oh my gosh.
So I caught him in just the nick amount of time.
So are you looking for him because he's not on the base and he's not answering your call? How much time elapsed where you were like, okay, now I've got to find him, something's wrong?
So he would call me every evening, no matter what. He would call me the first summer, he called me every evening. And then this summer, up until this point, he called me every evening, but one evening he didn't call. And I just felt
that gut instinct.
Yes, I felt something was not right. I was actually at a pool party with all of my little kids. And I said to my girlfriend, I just feel like something's off here. And she chatted with me about it, and which was odd because we were friends, but we weren't super close up until that point. So it was odd that I was kind of confiding in her, but it was that just gut sick feeling that something was wrong. And so that's when I went home and started calling his hotel room because his cell phone was shut off. I called, and they said he wasn't there. So that's when I got on the bank and I started searching around. And then he had posted some very mild quote on Facebook. And it wasn't the quote that he posted that alerted me. It was the fact that he posted that alerted me something was wrong. So right there is when I called 911 in Las Vegas, and I said, I don't know who to call. I don't know what to do, but my husband is going to kill himself, and I'm in Las Vegas and he's in Washington. So they were able to get me in contact with the 911 in Washington State and be on the phone with them. In the meantime, I've called my girlfriend to have her come over because all of my babies were sleeping at the time. And we started making phone calls to his family, my family. Like once we knew what was going on, we tried to establish a game plan and what to do because I knew I was going to need, whatever way this went, I knew I was going to need a lot of support.
Yeah, Brittany, tell us when this was. What month and calendar year for the listeners to know?
So this was in May of 2014.
Yeah. I will never forget. Now, I don't have your perspective. I can't even imagine the added depth of the worry, the fear, the everything from your perspective. But I will never forget where Brent and I were when we got that phone call. It felt like we were right with you, even though we were, states across the state border, watching those credit card movements, getting the police and trying to get the police to do something and wait, have they done something? And we're waiting to hear something back from you. It is, even hearing you recount this story all these years later puts me right back into the emotion of it. So I really appreciate your being willing to share this with us. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, you said it was the first of 6 suicide attempts. So if you'll share with us where this first one ended up. Obviously he lived, which is wonderful, and we're grateful. You said they got there just in time. Then maybe if you don't mind walking us through the next 5 and everything that surrounded that time period and hopefully where you are now that maybe isn't quite in the middle of where you were. But just thank you so much for being willing to share something that is so real and so raw. And we'll be right back. All right, you guys, we are back with my dear friend and sister-in-law, I guess technically ex-sister-in-law, but I just still call her my sister-in-law, Brittany Taylor. She is sharing with us some of the story of her marriage to my brother-in-law, his struggle with some mental illness that maybe she hadn't been aware of or that had been compounding kind of behind the scenes. And she's taken us to the point they were married in 2004. This is exactly a decade later, 2014, when Bryan went through his first, not just suicidal episode, but an actual attempt. So, Brittany, you've told us you've gotten a hold of the police. They're in Seattle. You get a hold of the hotel that you've tracked because you've seen the bank card activity online. They knock on the door. They stop him from jumping. Can you pick it up from there and then walk us through what happens next?
Yeah, so they're able to stop him from jumping. I'm able to actually be on the phone with the police. Not the officer that stopped him, but the officers that were part of the group that were there at the hotel. So I was able to know immediately that he was okay. And I asked the officer, I remember saying, I know this is kind of weird, but will you tell him I love him? And he said, that's not weird at all. Absolutely. Yeah. So they take him over to a hospital for some inpatient treatment. And I immediately get on the computer so that I can book a flight to go out to Washington from Las Vegas. My stepmom came with me, and heaven bless my mom and mother-in-law. They stayed with children. And I just took my, at the time, 4-year-old with me, and we spent almost a month out in Washington getting him healthy. And it was a fine line because he needed to have a certain amount of days at that internship to qualify. So his higher ups were very, very willing to work with us and very willing to do what they needed to do, but they hated to see him, quote unquote, throw a career away when he was so close to having the required amount of days needed. So we ended up extending that stay to a month. He was only in the hospital for about a week. And then we came back to Las Vegas together as a family. And then a few months after we were back, we went to Disneyland as a family. Things were great. I went to take kids to meet the teacher at the elementary school, and he went to the law school to write a paper, and he didn't come home. And again, with the sinking feeling, this time he got a little bit smarter as far as how I was tracking him. So he left his phone at home so that it couldn't even be tracked. But I had a friend who was on the cyber squad at the FBI who I actually got involved, and he was able to help me trace him a little bit and find out kind of the direction that I thought he was going in. My sister-in-law and I stayed up all night long calling hotels anywhere between Vegas to Washington to Death Valley to Arizona to New Mexico, all night long. That's all we did, searching for him. And he ended up being gone 3 really, really long days. And then he just showed back up.
And did he?
Which was hard.
Yeah, then... I remember this. I'm living this from my vantage point, but same shared experience, trying to picture myself in your vantage point. And he did. He just showed back up. I remember that. I remember it was Brian's home. Oh,
yep,
great.
And no, among the first I texted.
Oh yeah, no, I remember. I mean, you and I have this inside joke that's not even funny. Don't you dare call or text me late at night unless you tell me everything's okay, because the second I see your number on my screen, I'm going to worry something's wrong because of this history that we share. And he did. He just showed up. So can you talk about that for a minute, or do you want to move into what's next?
Well, it kind of lays the foundation for where things went. So he just showed up in the middle of the night. I was asleep. My kids were asleep. My mom was in our guest room asleep. And he just kind of returned and...
Does he walk into the house and come into the bedroom and go to bed? Does he wake you up?
Like, I remember waking up very confused and perplexed. And I think the first thing I said to him is, "Where have you been?"
Yeah.
And at that point, he didn't really want to talk about it. Like, he was just exhausted, which I can only imagine being to that point and then pulling yourself back and just having it be so emotionally exhausting.
Right.
So he, got into treatment that time as well. Shortly after that, he was medically discharged from the military for his mental health issues. And we moved up to Utah in 2015.
So he did not finish the law school and the JAG program, right? That's when he
did
left
not.
The military.
He withdrew that. He thought that was part of what was the pressure of that was what was having him spiral.
Yeah.
And so he just said, I think for the, my mental health and my happiness that I have to withdraw from this program. And I always told him, you could be whatever you want to be. I will support you as long as you're happy. So I was happy to have him make that switch, especially because, I'd gone from having my very, very best friend for 10 years to all of a sudden this man I didn't really recognize anymore. Very short with the children, very isolated and withdrawn. And he was not the man I had fallen in love with anymore. So it was hard. And then we got into our house 2015, and just a few short months later, he disappeared for about a month. And that's where things really launch into more of my life as to what it looks like right now. He was gone, and after about a week, I finally filed him as a missing person. And I think they were a little suspicious because I took so long, but I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is not the first time this has happened.
He's got a history.
Like, he'll show up. I'm sure he'll show up. But he had taken a large amount of money from our bank and just disappeared.
So he had the cash and we couldn't track him. I remember sitting with you in the basement because, like you said, at this point you live in Utah, which is where I live, and we're looking at running a credit report, looking for any kind of transaction, any kind of electronic trace, and there was nothing.
There was nothing because he pulled out the the cash in Colorado, and then it was a dead end from there because he had enough to not leave a paper trail. So after about a week when I filed that report, then I also filed for divorce for many reasons, one of which I didn't know his state of mind, and I didn't want him to take out a second mortgage on my home or rack up some sort of debt that I was going to be responsible for.
Sure.
So in my head, I thought, hey, if I can prove that he's been filed as a missing person and that I have filed for divorce, there's a pretty good chance that I could protect myself financially.
Right. Which by yourself, you mean you and your 5 little kids.
Right.
Because you still have, I mean, what age are the children by this time? 2015. They're still little.
Yeah. So my oldest was 10 and my youngest would have been 4, just barely 4.
So you filed the missing person release. You said that was after a week. He came back after a month. But by then you've made up your mind.
Those 3 weeks in between there were just hell. I mean, I had nothing. I had to go to the kids' school and say, hey, if dad shows up, don't let him check out the kids. I didn't know what state of mind he was in.
Right.
I still had to carry on as if life was quote unquote normal. My kids' teachers did know what was going on. The school knew. I was still, I remember I went to the gym and one of my older lady friends stopped me and said, how are you? And I said, I'm okay. And she's like, don't lie to me. That's just her personality. She called me out because I was a mess. I was a mess. I didn't know where he was. And I changed the locks on my house. I did not want him to just show up again. That was kind of the worst because my thought was if he wants to come home, he needs to have a conversation with me first.
Right. You can't just leave and come back and leave and come back.
Right. That's not fair to me. That's not fair to our children. That's not fair to anyone involved. And it's not fair to him because then he doesn't really get the help he needs because it's like, oh, let's just brush it under the rug.
Those are all really smart things. Did you have somebody giving you some guidance on this, telling you that you need...
In fact, somewhere along the way, I've missed my calling as like a crisis manager worker or something like that, because when I'm in these crisis situations, my course is so clear in my head that it's like I've missed my calling somewhere to do that.
Well, it's never too late. And I think that
you can now go into crisis management, Britt.
Well, here's the thing. I think that whoever's hearing this podcast that needs to hear it might gain some insight on how to protect themselves in the event that this is something that they may be going through. You're absolutely right. With him in his state of mind, his ability to, take out a mortgage or cost you some real financial harm, and it then in turn impacting your children, that could be really just add to and compound the problems that you're already facing. We need to take a break, and we are going to be right back. When we return, let's get to what the resolution is, how you decide to move forward with this divorce, and where are you today? We'll be right back in just a few minutes. And we're back with Brittany. Brittany, this is just a terrible story. I had heard some highlights about it, and I was kind of excited, but I'm sitting here listening to it, and I'm like, this is a nightmare. This is legitimately, just as a mom, having to go through this, having the uncertainty of where your husband is, what is he doing while he's gone, who knows what he's delving into, and then not knowing his mental state. And you already know he's attempted suicide, and he's struggling with depression. And he's now left the military, and has disappeared for a week, in which you file a missing persons report and also file for divorce. And then it goes 3 more weeks. And during that time, you change the locks. And now he's come back? How does he contact you when he comes back?
So I actually, once I filed for divorce, I just called his cell phone and it went straight to voicemail. But I just said, look, I don't know where you are, but I just need you to know that I filed for divorce. So, I need to serve you at some point. Otherwise, we'll just put it in the paper and I'll proceed without, your signatures and whatever I need to do. So once he finally turned his phone back on and heard that voicemail, he called me. And we talked, and ultimately what got him to call after that voicemail was the fact that he thought I would never file for divorce. I don't think he ever would have filed, and so I think that made him feel very trapped. So the fact that I took that action upon myself really surprised him, but I also feel like it was kind of throwing him a life preserver, if you will, that maybe there is a way out. Mm-hmm. So he was actually in Florida. His plan was to drive to Florida, which he did, and then bike from Florida to California, where he was then going to kill himself. But I caught him just in Florida. So I flew out to Tennessee, where he met me, and I drove the rest of the way back. And he spent another week in some treatment, some behavioral health inpatient treatment. And once he got out, I went through with the divorce. He kind of decided that he could not be a husband and a father. But being a father wasn't an option. You can't just not be a dad to your kids. So being married to me was the option. He didn't have to be married to me. So we sat down and told our kids that, Dad and I have decided that we're better off as friends than we are married. And that was never a lie, ever. That wasn't a cop-out. It wasn't something we just said to make our kids feel nice. We were genuinely better as friends than married. And he moved out. He got his own place. We were doing the whole,
Sure.
dad's house on the weekends, mom's house during the week thing, until one night I got maybe 10 missed calls from my brother, and I don't know how many text messages, just all saying, call me, call me, call me, call me. Bryan had made his way back to Vegas and was going to jump off of one of the large hotels there. But somebody saw him, called 911, and it was actually my brother's best friend, who's a firefighter in Las Vegas, who went into the hotel room and stopped him. So it was all just very kind of like the exact person that needed to go in there at the exact right time was where they needed to be. So that part was a little bit miraculous to me, that it would just happen to be his best friend. So he, again with the treatment, and then again, what are we at, 4? So 2 more attempts. He drove up to Idaho to jump off a bridge. And the latest one was actually the last time I saw Brent, Jennie, was when Bryan came to me with a gun and said, I need you to take this away from me. And I gave it to Brent because he was already holding a couple of our firearms. Yeah. So Brent met me at my office where I gave it to him. And then he left back to Afghanistan. It might have even been later that day. I can't remember, but it was very shortly after.
It was that famous August of 2018.
Yep.
I remember that. And I remember being very aware that we had that firearm. And I remember myself sometimes feeling nervous. What if Bryan got into an episode or if he got angry or came to me and demanded his gun, and the fear I felt, even being very much on the outside of this story. But grateful that he recognized he should not safely have a firearm at that moment in his life.
Yeah.
Right.
So what was driving this? I mean, it sounds like he thought, okay, it's the pressure of the military. It's the pressure of the JAG program. It's the pressure of both being a father and a husband. I won't be a husband anymore. It sounds like he's like trying to peel off layers of stress that is pretty normal in all of our lives. Like, what is driving this mental anxiety and frustration and inability to cope?
I don't know if we have an answer for that. He's been in therapy trying to figure that out himself. And I don't know if it's more than just genetics. I don't know. Because he doesn't have there's not some horrible thing that happened in his childhood that scarred him forever. There's never any
drug use.
There's not a major trauma.
There's not an event that happened that you can trace this back to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes people have struggles, and they're not really identifiable to an event or a trauma or an abuse or a
and there's no magic wand
right.
that says do this and I'll fix it all for you.
Right.
So, Brittany, can you tell us in these years, this has now been, like I said, we're getting closer to 20 years than 10 between you and me and these brothers we married, and life has not gone as planned for either of us. And yet, like I said at the opening, I look at you and see you as a fighter, as a champion, a wonderful mother. I see you with Bryan on a fairly regular basis. You are friends. I mean, you hear a lot of horror stories of divorces that just get so bitter and so nasty and so terrible, and yet I haven't seen that. Again, I'm on the outside, but can you walk us through maybe the last couple of years, what life is like with co-parenting and obviously technically divorced from him, and yet you've still got this amicable relationship? How is your mental health through this? How are the kids doing? And what maybe features of resilience have you found or learned to use that have gotten you to where you are today, even having this unresolved element of your life that, again, there's not just this cure that, oh, this happened and now we're done with it. This is kind of ongoing and still a struggle for Bryan and still an element in your life and your kids' life. Can you kind of give us that?
So since the last attempt, 2018, things are actually really good. So we call Bryan my ex-husband boyfriend because he and I have been dating since 2018, each other. So that's a little different, but
definitely unusual.
It really wasn't a lie. Like I said, when we told our kids that we were better off as friends than married at that time. And we're still not sure where things are going between the two of us, but I told him in one of our final conversations of being married that I was okay losing him as my husband, but I could not lose him as my best friend. So that's kind of where we sit now. As far as my mental health, obviously going through all of that. And then there were also just so many times where he wouldn't disappear, or it wouldn't be like a suicide attempt, but he would just disappear. He would just get up in the middle of the night and be gone and come back the next morning. And I would have no idea where he was. So living through that for several years threw me into a pretty intense anxiety. So I myself have been in therapy for about 4 years, at least monthly for 4 years. And I can't even tell you how much that has helped me be able to kind of parcel out these thoughts and these feelings. And, is this something I need to take on myself, or is it Bryan's own bag that he needs to deal with? I found that I wanted to be the fixer and I wanted to help. And so I was taking on his actions as if they were my own. And it was slowly killing me. I had to separate myself. I couldn't take responsibility. I couldn't do that. And so I had to separate myself from that, which is really, really hard to do. Especially I was a stay-at-home mom for 12 years. And so my whole job was to just fix these little people's things throughout the day, whether it's food or a boo-boo or tie a shoe or whatever. Like, that was my job. So to be able to separate myself from that was probably my biggest takeaway and what has helped me the most.
I can only imagine, because I've had some incidences in my life where it's really easy to spiral out of control. I call it spiraling, when you start to take it on as if this person's issues are your own, or that you've done something to create this, or if, what is it that I can do? And sometimes there's no answers. And when you're not getting those answers, you can spiral in your mind out of control. And I thank goodness for great therapists. I've been to a lot of different therapists. It's hard to find the really good ones, but when you find a really good one, it's so helpful, especially when you're dealing with something like this, because it is sometimes hard to really understand, like, what's my part in this, and how am I, like, empowering this person more to, like, enable that behavior, or how am I feeding it, and how can I understand that this is separate from me, and where do I create my own boundaries so that I can stay whole and I can be a whole mom for my kids, or, for me, it's, just being present in my own life even. So, yeah, I mean, gosh, these things are difficult ordeals. I love the fact that you obviously love him so much that you're still dating. This ex-husband boyfriend title is adorable and cute. And what a gift that you're still in his life, and that I mean, if your story had been, and I couldn't deal with this and I walked away, like, nobody would fault that. But how beautiful that you do love him so much, and that you're willing to stay in the game, even though it might be not as the wife currently.
Right. Well, and I had to do a lot of soul searching of my own, as far as sometimes as young wife and mother, you lose your own identity.
Absolutely.
Like, you devote so much to your children, and you devote so much to your husband that I remember my therapist said, "Well, who's Brittany?" And I was like, I don't know.
Brittany?
What does she like? I don't know. Who is Brittany? And so I brought back some, childhood passions back into my life of, I always loved to dance. So I got certified to teach at the gym, a couple dance classes, and that's helped my sanity more than anything else. I mean, I get paid pennies on the dollar, but it is 100% not about the money, but about my mental health and how much
Jennie and I totally relate. We do this podcast for 0 pennies.
We always agree. But I love what you've mentioned about finding that identity of your own, and finding the passion that isn't necessarily about making money or getting famous or getting rich, but it's mentally good for you. And for you, that happens to be dancing, or someone else, it might be a different form of exercise. You find a lot of people who've gone through trauma become runners, those crazy marathoners that just run like crazy, or whatever it is, that physical outlet that has nothing to do with just physical, right? I mean, there's so much more mental, emotional to it than just the physical act. And I'm so glad you found that.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
rediscovered that.
Been a lifesaver.
She's taken me to a couple of her classes before where I completely embarrassed myself, which is fine. But I was never a dancer, and don't know that I'll ever yet be one in the remaining decades I have on this planet.
It's all right. I have
Not
two
my
left feet
talent.
too. I would love to learn how to dance, but not really enough to actually practice. Anyway, anyhow, so where are you today? You're dating your ex-husband, and you're in counseling, and you are just taking this a day at a time and just finding who Brittany is, and is that
basically
where we're at? Yeah.
I'm so much stronger now that I know who I am, that I feel like I'm in a better position to be a partner, whether it's as a girlfriend or a potential wife in the future to him or whatever. But I just feel like I am not so dependent on him. I have my own circle of friends. I have my own hobbies, my own things that even say we were to get remarried and he were to move back in, I'm not giving up my gym time that I teach.
Right.
Like, that's just non-negotiable.
Right.
I mean, I have quit a job because they didn't want me to teach my class. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me.
And then you found yourself a better job. We were just talking about this the other day, and how you were able to stand up for what you needed and not kind of just give in or be browbeaten or anything. And it ended up working well. You've now got a good job. You're able to, you and your kids are still in the house, which I think is remarkable, given everything, and you didn't have to uproot them and take them who knows where, after the divorce and everything. Because a lot of families, when there's a divorce situation, the house is the first thing that gets sold, and everybody ends up moving or in apartments or separate cities, from mom or dad. But you've been able to stay close, stay in that home. Dad lives close.
Yeah, my ultimate goal in the divorce was to keep my home. Being military and moving so much, my kids had moved so often in their short little lives at that point, and I was not about to uproot them again. And so
you've been able to do it.
100% main goal was to figure out a way to keep my home.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome that you were able to achieve that goal.
So, a couple other things that I kind of just learned was I was actually listening to your guys' podcast this morning, driving into work. So it's funny that this is today. But in the episode I just listened to, it was, I can't remember who it was. Charlotte is who it was. And she was saying, just show up and help. You don't have to have a task or anything. But in my situation, I called people and said, do not just show up, because I thought it was going to be a police officer knocking on my door telling me my husband, they'd found him dead somewhere.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest anxiety, is every time I would get like a package or something, I would think, because I did wake up one time to a police officer pounding on my door to tell me, they had found him and that he wasn't okay.
Well, it's like I said, we have that shared history where the phone call or the knock on the door historically has brought such disturbing news that it's not always welcome, without the preface of, hey, Brittany, just want to talk. Everything's fine. Call me when you can, rather than, hey, call me. You can't just say, just call me to someone. And, this is something we could talk about maybe on another occasion. And Michelle, maybe we should put together a panel of people who have been through suicidal episodes from different points of view. To hear it from a spouse's point of view. Many of our listeners know I'm a child survivor of suicide. My dad killed himself when I was 10. Different people, it's really hard to put into words the intensity of loving someone through a suicidal attempt or successful suicide, if that's even a phrase. And yet there's so much that can be learned, because you're never the same person. It really does change your paradigm. My sister and I talk about this regularly too with our history. And there's certain things, once you've loved someone through suicide, whether it's an attempt or they go through with it or struggle with episodes over and over again, it puts you as the family member or loved one in such a different mental state. I myself have I've never been suicidal, but I can tell you nothing scares me more than losing another family member to suicide. Even having buried my husband, nothing scares me more than that suicide. And Brittany, I appreciate you being so willing to share with us. I appreciate Bryan being willing to not put the kibosh on this. You've shared a lot, and I, like Michelle, I think there will be people who hear this that will find strength, they'll find empathy, they'll find maybe some courage to know that they're not alone, maybe make a hard decision. The decisions you've made, now we've recapped it in 45 minutes. It might sound so easy. Oh, then I filed a missing person and I filed a divorce. Those are huge, heavy, weighty actions to go through. To tell your child's school, don't let dad take the kids if he shows up. These things, someone else surely that's listening is struggling with this or worries about this or has real life experience with this. So we just can't thank you enough for being willing to not just brush it under the rug and not just say, well, I'm redating my ex-husband. There's a story there. There's a history there. I love that you've said you've come out a stronger, better, healthier person in spite of or maybe because of all of this, and that makes you better able to help him, better able to help your kids, better able to help us and our listeners to understand this. It's often the trauma we go through that makes us a benefit to someone else, and I know that comes at a very heavy personal cost. So as a friend, as a sister, as sister-in-law, or whatever our legal title is right now, I'll just call you my sister. Thank you. I love you. I'm grateful for you for sharing this. I'm grateful that you've stuck with it. Your children are beautiful. Your family is beautiful. You definitely make Bryan a better man, married or not. We all know that, and we're grateful that you're still one of us and among us, and we look forward to many decades. Like you said, who knows what that future holds, but I'm glad we get to at least kind of take that journey together.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this. And really, honestly, prayers, continued prayers for your family, for your children, and for Bryan. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for coming on today and sharing your thoughts and your story with us. It's a powerful story, and I know it's going to touch, and there will be people that need to hear this story that are dealing with this, especially right now. We've gone through a full year of COVID. People are really, really struggling. I have people that I love and I'm concerned about, and I'm sure we all know somebody. So thank you so much, Brittany, for coming on today. If you would like to, if you would like to subscribe for free to our podcast, and we hope that you do, because we need all the subscribers we can get. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give us a rating and review. It really helps. If you or someone you know has a real story about real life that you're willing to share, send us an email at rrpodcast@ksl.com. You can also find us at Facebook at Relentlessly Resilient. We would love to hear from you. Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles that others are dealing with in their own lives. Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.